The bell rang at dawn, not because it was Sunday, not because someone pulled the rope, but because the wind had caught something tangled in the belfry above the old chapel of St. Jude. A shape fluttered barely visible through the fog, and the town's light sleeper, Agnes Durling, swore she saw it sway like a figure watching her from above. By noon, half the town was gathered at the chapel steps. Sheriff Lyle climbed the bell tower, grumbling about superstition and wind chimes. But when he reached the top, he didn't speak for a long time. He just stood there, staring at the rope, at the hat, wide-brimmed, worn felt. A cigarette burned through the band. Everybody in town knew that hat. It belonged to Elijah Merritt, the handyman, the war vet, the one who disappeared 4 years ago and left nothing but a rent check uncashed and an empty truck at the gas station. We thought he'd just left for the city. Some said he was running from debts. Others said he had family up north. And then there were the whispers that he'd been taken, that the church had secrets, that the bell had rung once before, just like this the day after the last person vanished. The last time we saw Elijah Merritt was a Thursday, late September. The air held that brittle edge where summer dies slowly and fall creeps in through your sleeves. He walked past the general store around 6:45, boots laced, collar popped up against the breeze. That hat, that same old hat, faded brown felt, wide-brimmed, with a singed mark like a crescent moon on the band. He nodded to Marla, the cashier unlocking the door. Didn't speak, didn't smile. But his eyes lingered just long enough for her to say later. He looked like he was leaving for good, but didn't want to. Down the street, he passed Sheriff Lyle, who was scribbling a ticket on a rusted-out sedan. Elijah said nothing. Sheriff didn't look up, but he'd remember. Later, he'd remember the way Elijah walked like someone counting down the seconds to something only he could hear at the gas station. Elijah filled a red jerry can, paid in cash, didn't say a word to the attendant, but the receipt was found later folded into fourths in the glove box of his truck. That truck never left town. It was parked near the South Woods Trail, unlocked, empty, no footprints leading away, no tire tracks behind. They say Elijah had his demons. That war changed him, that the town changed too, or maybe he just stopped pretending it hadn't. He used to fix things. Chimneys, gutters, broken windows. People said he'd fix your fence and your heart at the same time. But the last year he worked less, talked less. Started sketching in that battered notebook he kept under his coat. Elijah's last real job was 2 weeks before he vanished. He repaired the roof on the chapel of St. Jude. Said the bell pull was rotted through and needed replacing. The pastor, Reverend Kuntz, swore Elijah never finished the job. But when they climbed the tower weeks later, they found the pull was perfectly replaced. New rope, clean knotwork, secure as if it had been done by someone who cared. Elijah's landlady, Mrs. Norwick, said she heard footsteps that night. September 28th, a Thursday, not loud, but steady, crossing the creaky floor of the apartment above her. The next morning, she went up to bring him mail, but the door was ajar, and the apartment was cold, coffee cup in the sink, blanket folded at the foot of the bed. The notebook was gone, but what struck her most was what was left behind. The hat. She would have sworn he took it with him. Everyone said he never left the house without it. Yet there it was, resting on the back of the chair, like he meant to come back. The town didn't panic. Not at first. People leave. People drift. It wasn't until Sheriff Lyle got a call from Elijah's brother in Cincinnati, asking why no one had told him Elijah had moved to the city, that folks began to wonder. Because no one had told him. No one could have. No one knew where Elijah had gone. His bank account untouched. Truck still there. Phone disconnected. No forwarding address. It was as if he'd evaporated. Then there was the boy, Jacob Myers, 11 years old. He came running to his mother 2 days after Elijah vanished. Said he saw Mr. Merritt near the chapel, but not walking. Hanging, he said, from the bell rope. She scolded him, called it a horrible joke, told him to keep quiet. He did, until the day the hat showed up in the belfry. There's one more thing. Marla, the cashier. She closed early that day. Said she felt strange. Went home just after noon, and when she passed by Elijah's apartment that evening, she said the light was on. Only one window. Soft yellow. Still. No shadow moved across the glass. She stood there for a long moment, and in her gut, she swore he was sitting just beyond the curtain, staring back. But when she knocked on the door, there was no answer. The next morning, the light was off, and it never turned on again. The next few weeks brought quiet confusion. No investigation, no press, just whispers about how Elijah had always felt things. How he'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, saying the chapel bells were ringing when no one else heard them. How he once told Agnes Derling, "If I ever vanish, it won't be the city that takes me. It'll be something older." There were those who said he simply left, packed up and walked out like so many before him. But there were others, the quiet ones. The watchers who said Elijah left clues, like the note scribbled in charcoal under the chapel steps. It always rings before it chooses. It wants a name. Don't give it yours. No one knows who found it first. But the sheriff ordered it painted over the next day, and the paint peeled by morning, the day the hat reappeared years later, hanging in the belfry, untouched by rain, swaying just enough to catch the morning sun. The whole town changed. People stopped passing by the chapel. Windows stayed shut. Children crossed the street, and those who remembered Elijah Merritt stopped speaking his name aloud, as if naming him would wake whatever hadn't yet left. Because some say the bell rings only for the chosen, and once it rings for you, you don't leave. You just stop being seen. Rumors move faster than facts in a small town. And when Elijah Merritt disappeared, they moved like wildfire through dry grass. At first, it was simple. He probably left town. He always talked about Cincinnati. He wasn't made for small-town life. But as the days turned into weeks, the whispers started to change shape. Some said he was running from debt, that he owed back taxes, credit cards, money to a few folks around town, that maybe someone came to collect. Others said he had secrets, big ones, maybe military, maybe spiritual. There was a theory one only said late at night that Elijah had seen something no one else did. It started with a hardware store. Gus Lantry, store owner for 42 years, told folks Elijah bought more rope than anyone in town. Strong rope, nylon, twine, hemp, always paid cash. Never explained. He also bought locks, heavy-duty ones, and nails. Boxes of nails. Like he was boarding something up. Gus thought it was odd. But business was business. Then came the journal entry, or what was left of it. The sheriff's deputy, Ronnie, found a scrap of paper tucked inside a worn paperback at the library's donation bin. It was folded neatly, torn along the top, written in thick, slanted handwriting. It read, "If it rings twice, don't follow. If it rings 3 times, it already knows your name." No signature, no context. But Ronnie recognized the handwriting. He'd seen it before. On the logbook Elijah used when checking tools at the supply shed behind the town hall. That led to the search, the unofficial one. Ronnie, Agnes Derling, and 2 others went back to Elijah's apartment. They waited until after dark. No one spoke as they unlocked the door. The smell was stale. Dust, old wood. Abandonment. They didn't find much. A half-empty jar of black coffee grounds, an ashtray with a single unsmoked cigarette, a row of worn boots by the door. But it was Agnes who found the toolbox, hidden behind the false wall in the hall closet, wrapped in cloth, tied with twine. They didn't open it right away. It took them a week, as if something about it felt unfinished, heavy, not just in weight, but in consequence. When they finally did, they found what looked like an ordinary tool set. Hammer, wrenches, old bolts, a rusted handsaw. But tucked beneath the false bottom was a single sheet of paper, weathered, folded tight, and sealed with wax. They broke the seal. Inside was a note. Short, terrifyingly simple. Don't let them ring it again. They need a name. The first was mine. It was signed E.M. Ronnie took it straight to Sheriff Lyle. The sheriff read it twice, folded it in half, then again, and placed it in his desk drawer. He never spoke of it after that. Not to Ronnie, not to the others. But Agnes said he started going to church again, the next Sunday, and everyone after. Around the same time, old debts started showing up. Receipts. Elijah had paid off his rent 6 months in advance, left exact amounts in sealed envelopes for people he used to work for. $100 for Gus at the hardware store, $75 for the pastor, $200 for the gas station. No letters, no explanations. Just money, neatly labeled, neatly delivered, almost like he was saying goodbye. Then there was the matter of the back room at the church. Reverend Kuntz had always kept it locked, said it was storage, used only for old hymnals and candles. But 3 months after Elijah disappeared, someone broke in. Not much was taken. But what they left behind was strange. On the floor, laid out in a perfect circle, were 7 identical stones. Smooth, black, cold to the touch. In the center, a folded piece of paper, nailed to the floor. It read, 7 names once forgotten. 1 remains. No one claimed responsibility. No one spoke of it again. By spring, the town had quieted. People stopped mentioning Elijah. Life pressed on, but those who knew him best couldn't let it go. His brother, Daniel, came back through town. He stayed in a motel on Route 9, met with the sheriff, asked about the file. The sheriff gave him nothing, so Daniel visited Agnes, Ronnie, even Gus. He gathered scraps, every note, every sighting. And then, at breakfast one morning, he dropped a letter on the diner counter, postmarked 3 weeks after Elijah disappeared, stamped from the local office, addressed to Daniel Merritt, Cincinnati, Ohio. Inside was a single page. It said, "Tell them not to look." I didn't leave. It won't stop ringing for me. There was no return address, but the handwriting was undeniably Elijah's. Daniel stayed 1 more night, then left before dawn. But before he went, he gave the letter to Agnes. Said if it ever happened again, if the bell ever rang without wind, to read it aloud, to remind the town what had been warned. She folded the letter into her purse and never told a soul where she kept it. Of course, it did happen again, years later, but by then, Elijah Merritt had become less a man and more a story, a shadow, a warning in the shape of a name. And still, some say if you open the toolbox again and the one hidden behind the false wall in the closet, there's a new note inside. It's dated the week after the hat appeared in the belfry, and all it says is, it remembers, the chapel of St. Jude had always stood like a secret the town never meant to keep. White paint peeling, bell tower leaning ever so slightly eastward, as if trying to whisper into the wind. Most folks passed it daily without looking twice. It wasn't the main church anymore, not since the new one went up by the river with glass doors and air conditioning. But St. Jude had history. And some said it had memories, especially those who remembered the old pastor. Reverend Martin Kuntz came to Bellfield in 1978. Tall, soft-spoken, with an old suitcase and a bad cough. No family, no past. Just a voice that made people lean in. He brought with him no sermons, only questions. He listened more than he preached. Spent most of his days in the chapel basement. He said it was to clean the archives. But the files were never updated. The candles were always lit. And sometimes, late at night, people swore they heard hymns being sung with no one inside. One woman, Evelyn Marks, said she peeked through the window once after midnight. What she saw chilled her for years. Reverend Kuntz standing in the center of the chapel, head tilted back, arms outstretched, with 7 chairs arranged in a circle around him. Only 6 were empty. She never spoke to him again. The first disappearance happened in 1980. A boy named Peter Withrow, 12 years old. He went missing after choir practice. Shoes found on the chapel steps. Organ music still playing. No one ever saw him leave. Reverend Kuntz said he dismissed the choir at 6:00 p.m. Said Peter must have wandered off, that he was a lonely child, that maybe he meant to disappear. But Evelyn remembered something else. She said that night, the bell rang 3 times. Slow, measured. Even though no one was in the tower, over the next 20 years, 6 more people vanished from the town. Each one tied however loosely back to St. Jude. A janitor who worked evenings, a wedding guest no one claimed, a widow who lit candles daily for her husband. The sheriff never found patterns, but the locals did. Each person had entered the church and never come out. After the 5th disappearance, someone spray painted across the chapel doors, "Ring for the lost, pray for the living." It was scrubbed clean by morning, but the letters came back faintly every time it rained. When Reverend Kuntz disappeared in 1999, it was almost expected. He missed a Sunday. Then 2 parishioners found the chapel doors unlocked, the candles melted down, and a note on the pulpit. It said, "Forgive me, I gave them names. Now mine is taken." No body, no suitcase, no sign of struggle. Only one thing left behind, his collar, hung neatly over the bell pull. After that, the chapel was closed, boarded up, deemed historically unstable by the town council, but it was never demolished. No one would vote for it. Not even the ones who said they didn't believe. The bell tower stood silent for over a decade, until Elijah Merritt started repairing the roof. When Elijah took the job, folks asked him why. Why work on a building no one used? Why spend hours alone inside a place that made even daylight feel heavy? He just shrugged, said, "Things that are abandoned don't always stay that way." He kept a notebook with him. Sometimes he'd sit under the steeple, staring up at the bell rope. One afternoon, he asked Gus from the hardware store for the same rope Kuntz used. Gus blinked. Said he didn't remember Reverend Kuntz buying rope. Elijah only smiled, said, "That's because he didn't buy it. He borrowed it." Then came the discovery in the archives. A volunteer historian, Mrs. Pauline Myers, was cataloging old town records. She opened a locked drawer in the chapel's basement that hadn't been touched in years. Inside was a tattered register, the chapel's original logbook. Names, dates, ceremonies, births, marriages, funerals, and something else. Pages torn out. 7, to be exact. Each removed with care, not ripped, but sliced clean at the binding. And where those pages once were, someone had written in red pencil, 1 by 1, 7 forgotten, 1 remains. Pauline didn't tell anyone at first. She tried to track down the missing pages, checked newspapers, microfilm, but those exact weeks, missing from the archives. like someone had erased time itself. When she finally brought it to the mayor's attention, he dismissed it, said it was just deterioration. She resigned the next day and moved out of town a week later. What remained was a feeling, a pressure in the air around the chapel, a silence too deep for birdsong. Children no longer dared each other to peek inside. Even teenagers stopped using the grounds as a hangout, because sometimes, just sometimes when the wind hit just right, the bell rang once. No rope, no wind strong enough, just once, low, final, and always at dawn. When Elijah disappeared, people remembered all of this again, like waking up from a long, uneasy dream. They remembered the missing boy, the vanished pastor, the torn pages, the 7 names, and they wondered if maybe Elijah wasn't the first, but the last, the 7th, the one who remained. But what unsettled people most wasn't the possibility that he'd been taken. It was the idea that he'd known, that he'd walked willingly into the silence and tried, in his own way, to leave warnings behind. The rope, the hat, the notes, not to be found, but to be understood. As if he'd studied the chapel's secrets long enough to realize it wasn't haunted, it was hungry, and all it ever needed was a name. It was a Tuesday, damp, gray, quiet in the way that made even footsteps sound like echoes. Agnes Derling opened her shop at 7:15 a.m., as she always did. She turned the key, pushed open the door, unfolded the sidewalk sign, and when she looked up, she froze. There it was, swinging gently in the wind, like a pendulum without a clock, Elijah Merritt's hat, high above, in the belfry of the old chapel, caught perfectly on the iron rungs where the bell rope should have been. Too high for someone to have tossed it, too centered to be coincidence. Agnes didn't move, didn't breathe. For the longest time, she just stared. And then, quietly, she whispered, "He's back." Within the hour, a small crowd had gathered. Nobody said his name, but everyone knew. Sheriff Lyle stood beneath the tower, hands on his hips, jaw tight. He told folks to clear out, but didn't raise his voice. Because truth be told, he didn't want to climb the tower either. Not again. It was Ronnie Teague, the deputy, who went up. He took slow steps, counting them aloud, hand brushing the wall as if the wood itself might move. When he reached the top, he didn't touch the hat, didn't speak. He just stood there, then turned around and came back down. "It's dry," he said. "Shouldn't be." Rain had started the night before and hadn't let up. Everything else, the steeple wood, the metal railing, even Ronnie's shoulders was soaked. But the hat bone dry, like it had been brought there after the rain, or kept somewhere else, somewhere the weather couldn't reach. Sheriff Lyle ordered the bell rope removed, said it was a safety hazard, said someone could get ideas. Ronnie pulled it loose, cut it with his knife, dropped it into the sheriff's hands. And that was when Lyle noticed something strange. The end of the rope, where it had been tied, wasn't frayed, it was knotted. A perfect knot, sailor style, precise, deliberate, and burned into the fiber. Just above the knot was a letter, E, just one, scorched, marked, Elijah's first initial. They burned the rope that night, behind the station, without ceremony. Sheriff Lyle tossed it into the barrel himself, watched the flames rise, watched the fibers curl and turn to smoke. But Agnes took a photo first, snapped it with her old Polaroid, tucked it inside her Bible between pages 102 and 103, where the psalm reads, "Even the darkness will not be dark to you." That night, the bell rang. Once, no wind, no rope, no one in the tower. Just a long, low clang that sent dogs howling and porch lights flickering across town. Some said it was an echo. Others said it was impossible. But a few people, those who still remembered the missing, went to the chapel before sunrise. They found the front door cracked open, not wide, just enough to say, "Come in, if you dare." Inside, Everything was still. Candles unlit. Pews dusty. The smell of damp wood and old hymns. But in the very center of the chapel, just beneath the belfry, was a single envelope. No stamp, no name. Just one word written in black ink. Remember, Agnes picked it up, opened it. Inside was a drawing. Charcoal, rough but clear. It showed the chapel exactly as it was, but with one difference. 7 shadowy figures lined up before the altar. One had no face, and in the back, near the entrance, was a man in a wide-brimmed hat, watching. The next day, the town council met in emergency session. They debated sealing the chapel permanently, even considered demolition, but no one could find a contractor willing to touch it. One by one, calls went unreturned. Permits got lost. Excuses piled up like autumn leaves. Eventually, the plan was dropped, and the chapel was left alone, just like it seemed to want. But things didn't stay quiet. The librarian, Eloise Franklin, reported that the lights in the archive room had begun flickering. Only between 6:40 and 6:45 mem. The exact window Elijah was last seen. She tried replacing bulbs, switching outlets. Nothing worked until she removed one framed photo from the wall. It was the 1984 town choir. Elijah was in the back row, barely visible, but behind him, drawn faintly into the wood paneling behind the choir, was the outline of a 7th chair, a shape not in the original photo, a shape that hadn't been there before. And then came the phone call. Agnes picked up around 2, a whisper, crackling. Just one phrase, "Don't let it pick again." She called the sheriff, but the line cut out. When the operator traced it the next day, it had come from inside the chapel, a line that had been disconnected since 1999. Ronnie returned to the bell tower, alone. He climbed the steps, not to remove anything, but to leave something behind. A recorder, battery-powered, tucked beneath a loose board beneath the bell. He let it run overnight. The next morning, he retrieved it, played it in the safety of his patrol car. For the first 5 hours, there was nothing, just creaking. Then a click, soft, a shuffle of feet. Then a voice, low, calm, familiar. "Elijah," Ronnie whispered. Because it was Elijah, there was no doubt. The voice said, "If they ring it again, I won't be the last." Then silence. The recorder vanished from the evidence locker a week later. No break-in, no logs, just gone, and no one spoke of it again. But Ronnie started locking his windows, double-checking the back seat of his cruiser, and Agnes stopped walking by the chapel. She changed her route to the store, even if it added 15 minutes. Because the hat, it disappeared again. One day it was there, the next gone. No wind, no storm, just gone. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in before dawn, people swear they see a shape in the belfry. Not a hat, a man, standing, watching, waiting. He drove into town just after midnight. No headlights, no music. Just the sound of gravel under tires and rain sliding across the windshield. Daniel Merritt, Elijah's younger brother by 6 years. Civil engineer, divorced, no children. He hadn't visited Bellfield in over a decade, not since their mother's funeral. But something had brought him back now. Not obligation, not grief. Something sharper, something unfinished. The next morning, he walked into the sheriff's office. Calm, expression unreadable. He carried a folder under one arm, wore the same green jacket Elijah once had, and asked for Sheriff Lyle with a voice that didn't waver. Ronnie Teague offered him coffee. He declined. Sheriff Lyle came out a few minutes later, eyes tired, movements slower than they used to be. "Daniel," he said. Daniel nodded. "Let's talk." They sat in Lyle's office for over an hour. No one knows what was said. But when the door opened again, Daniel walked out holding a single sheet of paper. Not a file, not a report, a copy, a scanned version of the note found in Elijah's toolbox. "Don't let them ring it again." They need a name. The first was mine. Daniel studied it, folded it, slipped it into his pocket. Then he said to Lyle, loud enough for the others to hear. He didn't leave, and walked out. Daniel made his rounds. He visited Agnes at her shop. They spoke in hushed tones for 15 minutes. At one point, she touched his hand, not like a friend, but like someone trying to wake a ghost. Later, he knocked on Ronnie's door. The deputy let him in without a word. When Daniel came out, his face was paler, his fists clenched. He didn't go to the chapel, not yet. Instead, he checked into room 3 at the Bellfield Motor Inn. And for the rest of the evening, he sat at the small table by the window, going through the folder he'd brought with him. It was full of letters, receipts, photos, but in the center, protected by 2 plastic sleeves, was a handwritten letter dated October 17th, 4 years ago, postmarked Bellfield, 3 weeks after Elijah disappeared. The letter read, Danny, it isn't what they say. I didn't go to the city. I didn't go anywhere. They don't want me to. I've stayed quiet. I've stopped the bells. But I don't know how long I can keep it quiet. Tell no one. But if they hear it ring, don't come looking. It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was Elijah's. Daniel would have known it anywhere. The next day, Daniel walked to the chapel. He didn't go in. He just stood at the gate, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the bell tower. The hat was still gone. The doors were still closed, but Daniel felt it. A pressure, a tension, like the building was breathing. He turned around and walked back to the inn. That evening, he went to the diner, sat at the corner booth, ordered black coffee and cornbread. He pulled out a notebook and made a list. 7 names. He didn't say how he got them, didn't explain how he knew, but there they were. 1. Peter Withrow. 2. Janet Ellis. 3. Malcolm Farrow. 4. Rose Keene. Finca Buster Kuntz. 6. Matthew Doyle. 7. Elijah Merritt. Each connected to the chapel. Each vanished. Each on a Thursday. Daniel flipped the page. He wrote a single word, why, and then he circled it, twice, that night. The motel clerk heard a strange sound, footsteps pacing, a faint metallic clang, like someone dragging something across wood. When he knocked, Daniel answered right away, eyes bloodshot, voice flat. You hear it too. The clerk didn't answer. He went back to his office and locked the door. The next morning, Daniel wasn't at the inn, but the folder still there, neatly stacked, placed on the table with a note on top for Agnes. The door was unlocked. Nothing was missing. The bed was made, but Daniel Merritt was gone. Sheriff Lyle checked with the bus station. No tickets sold. Ronnie checked the train depot. No sign. Even the gas station cameras, grainy but serviceable, showed no record of him leaving town. It was as if he'd vanished, just like Elijah. But Agnes received the folder. She opened it in her kitchen, carefully, quietly. Inside, along with the letters and photos, was something new. A torn page from a chapel logbook, burnt around the edges. It read, "One comes seeking answers. One comes bearing proof. One comes too close. He will be silenced." And beneath it, in a different hand, were 3 words written in red ink. He heard it. Agnes called Ronnie. He came over within the hour. They read the letter together, twice. Then they sealed it back in the folder. Ronnie placed it in a safe, and neither spoke of Daniel again, not in public, not even between themselves. But 3 days later, a new sound came from the chapel. Not the bell, not the wind, a voice, crackling through the chapel's old speaker system, which hadn't worked in over 20 years. It said, "You should have stayed away, Danny." Then silence, and the chapel door slammed shut on its own. Since then, no one's seen Daniel Merritt. No sightings, no credit card activity, no confirmed voice calls. Just one voicemail. Agnes received it a week later. 5 seconds long. Heavy breathing. Then Elijah's voice. He knows now. It started with the dogs. Around 2:14, they began barking in waves, one end of town to the other. Not the usual restless howling, but sharp, urgent, like warning bells wrapped in fur and instinct. Agnes sat up in bed before her eyes even opened. She didn't know why, only that something was wrong. Then the wind stopped. Completely. The trees stilled. The curtains stopped swaying. Even the old clock on her kitchen wall seemed to hold its tick. And in that thick, unnatural silence, the bell rang. Once, clear, low, heavy with age. Then again, twice, longer this time. It vibrated through floorboards and fingernails. And then a third time, 3 rings, exactly like the legend, exactly like the note Elijah left behind. If it rings 3 times, it already knows your name. Ronnie Teague was already outside. He didn't remember grabbing his keys, didn't remember putting on his coat. He just knew he had to go. Lights were coming on across town, windows cracked, voices whispered. No one needed to ask where the sound came from. They all knew. Ronnie arrived at the chapel first, parked his cruiser sideways in front of the gate, left the engine running, didn't draw his weapon. He walked up slowly, one hand brushing the old iron fence. The doors were wide open. Smoke or fog was coiling just inside. It had no source, no smell, just there, moving like breath. He stepped in. The pews were empty. Dust hanging like curtains. Candle wax pooled on the floor, as though they'd burned non-stop for hours. And on the altar, right where Reverend Kuntz had once placed the Sunday bulletins, was something new. A hat, not Elijah's, smaller, frayed around the brim, with a strip of lace tied through the band. A child's hat. Ronnie stared at it, because it looked familiar. Too familiar. He'd seen it in a photo once, in the town archives. A photo of Peter Withrow, the first to vanish. He didn't touch it, didn't even step closer. He just backed out slowly, closed the chapel doors, and called Agnes. She answered on the first ring. "I heard it," she said. "So did everyone," he replied. And neither of them said what they were both thinking. It was choosing again. By morning, the town was buzzing. Whispers in the grocery aisle, side glances on front porches. The mayor issued a statement, called it a malfunction in the weather vane, blamed vibrations, dismissed the fears. But nobody bought it, because that night, Agnes vanished. Her shop was closed the next morning. Lights off. No sign of struggle. Just a note on the counter. 4 words. "Don't follow the bell." Signed, D. Ronnie broke the lock on the chapel himself, stormed inside. The hat was gone, the altar wiped clean. But there was something else. Fresh dust disturbed along the left pew row. A footprint. Small, pointed toe, worn tread. The kind of shoe Agnes wore every day. In the far back of the chapel, Ronnie found an envelope wedged beneath the old hymnals. Inside was a Polaroid. Agnes, standing inside the bell tower, not frightened, not restrained, just looking straight at the camera. Behind her a shadow, tall, faceless, fading into the bricks. There was no note, no explanation. Only one thing written on the back of the photo in shaky handwriting. She heard it too, that night. The sheriff called an emergency meeting. Only 7 people showed up. The rest claimed they were out of town or didn't feel well. Lyle stood at the podium, eyes dark. "We're not chasing ghosts," he said. But even his voice shook. Ronnie sat in the back, said nothing, just kept replaying the bell sounds in his head. He couldn't forget the pattern. 3 rings, and the whisper he thought he heard between them. "Come closer." Over the next week, things unraveled. Mailboxes were opened without explanation. Streetlights flickered in sync every night at 2:14 a.m. And people began dreaming of Elijah, all of them. The same dream. He stood at the edge of the woods, just behind the chapel, hat in hand, mouth stitched shut, and behind him, a door, tall, wooden, carved with symbols no one recognized. Every time someone asked his name, he shook his head, then pointed to the chapel and woke them up. The town fell silent after that. People stopped walking alone. Children weren't allowed near the chapel fence. Even the grocery store played classical music now to keep the quiet out. And yet, every Thursday, someone reported hearing the bell again, not always 3 times. Sometimes 1, sometimes none, but always felt like a pressure in the chest, like breath held too long. One Thursday, Ronnie returned to the chapel. He didn't tell anyone, just parked near the back trail and entered through the cellar door. He carried Elijah's notebook, a flashlight, and one question: was it always the chapel, or was the chapel just the doorway? Inside, the air was colder, the fog denser. He descended the stairs, past the pews, past the altar, to the cellar where Reverend Kuntz used to keep his papers. There he found it, a trapdoor, nailed shut, dustless, newer wood, carved into the top, 7 marks, 6 etched deep, 1 barely scratched. He counted them. 6 vanished, 1 pending. And as he leaned in closer, the bell rang above him 3 times. He ran. Didn't stop until he was back in his cruiser, hands shaking, shirt soaked. He drove home, locked the door, and placed Elijah's notebook back in the drawer. But the final page was different now. He hadn't seen it before. Maybe it hadn't existed before. It read, "When the 7th is gone, the door opens, and then the rest follow." Below that, a small, smudged thumbprint, pressed into charcoal. Ronnie stared at it, because he'd seen that thumb before. It was Agnes's. Ronnie returned at dusk. No backup, no badge, no radio, just a crowbar, a flashlight, and Elijah's notebook zipped inside his coat. He didn't tell the sheriff, didn't call the mayor, didn't even leave a note. Only left his cruiser parked at the chapel gate. Keys in the ignition, engine off. If something went wrong, he wanted them to know exactly where to find him. The chapel was colder that night, colder than it should have been. No wind, no open windows. But the cold felt alive, curling up his spine and down his arms like a memory trying to dig in. The pews were darker than usual, the altar untouched, but Ronnie didn't stop there. He walked straight to the cellar door behind the pulpit, the one Reverend Kuntz used to call off limits. He didn't hesitate. He opened it. The steps creaked beneath his boots. Each groan sounded louder than the last, like the chapel itself was waking up. The air grew heavier. Dust hung like breath. The walls seemed to bend inward the deeper he went. By the time he reached the cellar floor, his flashlight was flickering, but he knew where to go. To the corner, past the rusted hymn storage, beneath the ancient stone beam. There it was. The trapdoor. The carvings looked deeper now, more defined. 6 full gashes, 1 faint. Ronnie ran his fingers over the 7th, the shallow one. It was Agnes's. He felt it. Without wasting time, he jammed the crowbar into the edge and pulled. The wood groaned, cracked, and finally snapped open. A sharp gust of cold air surged up from the hole, not like a draft, more like an exhale. Ronnie covered his mouth. The smell was damp, old, and something else. Earth, decay, ash. He aimed the flashlight downward. Stairs, stone, worn, leading into a narrow passage with walls of packed soil. It wasn't a basement. It was a tunnel. He descended slowly, knees tense, hand brushing the side for balance. The notebook thumped softly against his chest with every step. At the bottom, the space opened. A room, roughly circular. No lights, no candles. Only stone pillars rising from floor to ceiling like ribs in the body of something ancient. And in the center, a chair, wooden, splintered, old as sin. Tied to it with rope frayed but strong was a bundle of cloth. Ronnie stepped closer. His boots echoed on the stone. The cloth moved. He stopped breathing. The flashlight trembled in his hand. The cloth fell open slightly. Inside, a notebook, identical to Elijah's. He lifted it. On the cover, burned into the leather, was a single word. Return. He opened it. The handwriting was the same. Elijah's. The entries were frantic. Sloppier the deeper in he went. Each one began with a date, but the dates made no sense. Some were from years before Elijah was born. Others, decades after he disappeared. Time didn't work the same down here. He read an entry aloud. It sleeps in stone. It waits in silence. Names are its currency. Voices are its leash. The bell is only a hand knocking from below. The light flickered again. This time, it didn't come back on. Ronnie stood in total darkness. And then he heard it. Not the bell. A voice. Soft. Female. Ronnie. It echoed off the stone like a breath he'd forgotten to take. He turned toward the sound. Nothing. Then again. Closer this time. Ronnie. I'm cold. He knew that voice. Agnes. He whispered her name. No answer. But the voice continued. Closer still. It's so heavy here. So loud. Help me remember. He stumbled back. Fumbled for his phone. No signal. He turned toward the stairs, only to find they were gone. Vanished. Just wall behind him now. As if the tunnel had swallowed itself. He ran toward where they had been, hands scraping stone. Panicked breathing. Then, a gust of warm air and silence. The kind of silence that lives beneath skin, that wraps itself around the bones. And then he saw it. At the far end of the chamber, another door, wooden, tall, carved in patterns like those from the notebook sketch. Not built grown, as if the chapel above had roots, and this was its heart. He approached. The carvings pulsed faintly, like veins. As he drew closer, he heard something new. Voices, not one, many. Whispers overlapping. Some begging, some laughing, some simply repeating names. Names he knew. Elijah, Kuntz, Agnes, Daniel. And one he didn't, his own, Ronnie Teague. 7th. He turned and ran. No plan, no thought. Only the sense that something had just seen him and wanted him to know. He didn't remember finding the exit, only that the trap door slammed shut behind him as if something on the other side had given up. He climbed the cellar steps 2 at a time, burst into the chapel, gasping. The hat was back, on the altar, and beneath it, a photo, Agnes, but different. Eyes blackened, mouth stitched in charcoal. Behind her, Ronnie's cruiser. That night, he left town. Didn't tell anyone. Didn't pack. Didn't call the sheriff. He drove until the gas light came on, then kept going. He never reached the next county. His car was found in a ditch by the river. Engine cold, driver's door open. No blood. No sign of a struggle. Only one item left on the front seat. Elijah's notebook. Open to the final page. A new line had been added. He saw the door. They found Ronnie Teague's cruiser at dawn. Drifted slightly into a ditch beside the Bellfield River. No damage. Keys still in the ignition. Engine cold. Driver's door open. No footprints. No tire marks. No sign of where he'd gone. Just a notebook. Elijah's left on the passenger seat. Open to a single line. He saw the door. The town froze. Not officially. The mayor said nothing. The sheriff held no press conference. There were no posters, no searches, no volunteer efforts. Because Bellfield had seen too many disappearances to pretend anymore. This wasn't a missing person. It was a pattern, and now it was complete. 7. Peter Withrow, Janet Ellis, Malcolm Farrow, Rose Keene, Reverend Kuntz, Elijah Merritt, Ronnie Teague. Each vanished without trace, each connected to the chapel, each preceded by the bell, each followed by silence. The trap door in the cellar was sealed. No one knows who did it. No permits were filed. But the next time someone tried to enter the chapel basement, they found solid concrete poured floor to ceiling, still wet at the edges, still warm, and carved into it, in what looked like fingernails, The door is closed. Agnes's shop was reopened. Not by her, by the town council. Turned into a historical display, a preservation of local folklore, they called it. But in the back of the store, in the break room where she used to read the paper, a Polaroid hung on the wall. It showed the chapel. Dawn light. Fog curling around the bell tower. The hat was visible, but so was something else. If you looked closely, just behind the steeple's railing, a face, blurry, but unmistakably familiar. Ronnie's. The sheriff retired quietly, left his badge on the chapel's front door, pinned with a single nail and no explanation. He didn't move out of town, just stopped answering calls, walked the woods behind his house most days, stopped speaking to strangers. Some say he still visits the chapel at night, not in sight, just stands at the gate, waiting for the bell. The town changed after that. More homes for sale, more kids homeschooled. Tourists stopped coming, but the chapel remained. No one touched it, even as weeds grew around the fence. Even as the foundation cracked, it stood, waiting. Every Thursday at dawn, a faint ringing could still be heard, not from the bell, but beneath it, like something remembering the motion of sound. And some mornings, on the coldest ones, fog curls not around the tower, but up from beneath it, as if the ground itself is breathing. One spring, a hiker passing through town stopped to sketch the chapel. She was an artist from out east. Didn't know the history, didn't ask questions. She just liked old churches. She posted her drawing online, captioned it, "Something's watching from the belfry." In the drawing, which was sharp, precise, almost photo-like, a shadow stretched across the tower floor, and a second figure stood just behind the bell. Not Elijah, not Ronnie. Something taller, thinner, featureless. The artist disappeared 2 days later, left her motel room unlocked, all her things untouched. Only one thing was missing, her sketchbook. Today, if you ask people in Bellfield about the chapel, they'll say it's just an old building. That stories got out of hand, that grief plays tricks on memory, but no one steps through the gate. No one touches the doors, and no one mentions Elijah by name, because the door may be closed, but names still echo. And the bell never forgets. This story teaches us a quiet truth, that some places carry more than history, they carry memory, grief, and consequence. When people vanish, it's easy to chase reason, but sometimes the answer is silence itself. And if a name is all it takes to open a door, the wisest choice may be to stop speaking, because not every mystery is meant to be solved. Some are meant to be respected. Thank you for listening to this chilling tale from Bellfield. If the story left you with goosebumps or unanswered questions, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more dark mysteries, and share your thoughts below. What do you think was behind the door? And if the bell rang tonight, would you answer it? Until next time, keep your ears open and your name hidden.